Good evening. It's been announced this evening that the former Liberal Democrat leader, Lord Paddy Ashdown, has died at the age of 77. Lord Ashdown began his career in the military as a Royal Marine and then went on to lead the Liberal Democrats for 11 years from 1988. In November this year, he revealed that he'd been diagnosed with bladder cancer. Well, we can speak now to the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Vince Cable, who joins us from his constituency in Twickenham in West London. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Sir Vince. A very sad evening for the party and for you yourself personally. And talk to us about what sort of figure Lord Ashdown was.
Well, he was a very formidable man. It is, very sad that we've lost him. I mean, he was politically active and really very dynamic and full of ideas, right to the end. He was a big figure at our party conference only a few months ago. But, going back to the beginning, I mean, he was, Mr. Action Man. He was ex-military, he was full of drive, full of ambition, full of energy, and that's how he led the party. And he led us from a very low base in the mid-1980s to a position of being a formidable new third force in British politics in the mid-90s, and which is when I got elected in 1997, very much on his coattails. He was, very charismatic, strong leader, led from the front, good, strong opinions, and very idealistic. He very strong belief in, Britain's international mission. He was in favour of humanitarian intervention in Yugoslavia, and of course later served as the representative there, as the United Nations. He fought for the rights of people of Hong Kong when they were threatened with exclusion from Britain. He was a strong pro-European. Those were some of the elements in this really remarkable individual.
You spoke earlier of the immense affection that he would inspire.
Yes, indeed. I mean, he was a tough man, actually. I mean, he had strong opinions, strong views about how things should be done, but he was always very clear and straightforward and honest, and people knew what they were taking on, and I think that inspired trust and affection in him.
It was a very long career that he had. He started as leader of the Liberal Democrats, effectively being the first leader of this new party, this merged party between the Liberals and the Social Democrats. A difficult job at the time.
Well, it was difficult, indeed. I think he described it that we were, at that point, an asterisk in the opinion polls. We were no longer counted. And gradually he built up the strength of the party over a decade. We progressed through by-elections, through growing influence, and had a really successful period in the late 1990s when all of his hard work and leadership produced good results. I think actually you have to go back before his leadership of the party. I mean, he served an example really about how politics is done. He started from virtually nothing in Yeovil, which he was unemployed for a while, did all kind of interesting jobs in the local community, was a youth worker, fought his way up from nothing to becoming their MP, and that set an example about how we, the rest of us, should campaign, and he served as a terrific role model for a campaigning politician.
And listening to the tributes coming into him this evening, one is really struck by the number of times people have talked about his honesty, his integrity, and his very strongly held principles.
Yes, indeed. I think more than that. I mean, I think the period when he was at his peak as a party leader, he had a very positive view about the country. This was a relatively optimistic period, and he was an optimistic man, and he gave really great leadership when it was needed. I mean, it was a pity in a way that his vision, which was that we should work in government with Tony Blair's administration, wasn't realised because there was a sort of Labour landslide, and his own achievement in doubling our number of MPs and building us up into a third force was slightly overshadowed. But he did play a major role in influencing the way that government developed and took on issues of constitutional reform, which were very much his own.
It's only really a few weeks ago that it was revealed that he was diagnosed with bladder cancer. Were you yourself aware of how seriously ill he was?
Well, I heard it secondhand. I mean, unfortunately, it all happened very quickly. I said the last dealings I had with him were at our party conference, where he was, a major force and speaking up for reforms in the party. He had a real vision about where he wanted us to go and where he wanted the country to go. And that's how I remember him in his prime. And I'm sure that's how he would want to be remembered.
Indeed. Sir Vince Cable, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts of Lord Paddy Ashdown. Many thanks indeed. Sir Vince Cable there, leader of the Liberal Democrats. Well, let's take a look back now at Lord Ashdown's life and career with our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young.
This is how most people will remember Paddy Ashdown, the action man, the party leader with the least affection for Westminster. Long before he fired his first political salvos, he was a military man, a Marine. He saw active service in Borneo and Malaya, as documented at the time.
At this post, 20 yards from the border, 23-year-old Marine Lieutenant Ashdown from Somerset has local forces as well as Marines under his command.
He excelled as a member of the elite Special Boat Squadron, spoke fluent Mandarin Chinese. He spent time too in his native Northern Ireland during the worst of the Troubles. After a period as a diplomat and some time on the dole, Paddy Ashdown got involved with the Liberals, elected MP for Yeovil in 1983. Later, in 1988, after the painful merger with the SDP that formed the Liberal Democrats, he became leader.
I say to the millions out there who are concerned about poverty and about unemployment, come and join us.
The party was at rock bottom in the polls and financially crippled. Paddy Ashdown built it up again, but at some cost to his home life. He admitted an affair with his former secretary, Tricia Howard.
What Paddy said stands. He's made a statement already, and I was perfectly well aware of what he was going to say.
Fears that his party's poll rating would suffer were unfounded, and in 1997 he guided it to its greatest election achievement since the 20s, doubling the number of Lib Dem MPs. By this stage, he'd already been contemplating the prospect of coalition government with Labour. A joint cabinet committee was established, with Liberal Democrats invited to talks at number 10. According to Ashdown, the plan to bring the Lib Dems into government foundered on opposition from senior Labour ministers and the thorny problem of electoral reform. In the Liberal Democrat leader, Tony Blair had a candid friend.
Your government, I believe, could become potentially a historic one, but only if it lets go a little, if it relaxes a little, if it tolerates dissent a little, if it welcomes diversity a little, and if it interferes a little less.
Charles Kennedy is duly elected.
Paddy Ashdown resigned the leadership in 1999, handing the baton on to Charles Kennedy and retiring from the House of Commons 2 years later. He spent time in Bosnia at some personal risk at the height of the war there. And in 2002 became the High Representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
My job is to help to create the structures of a modern European democratic state, and then to repatriate the powers that the international community has held here back to the Bosnians.
But he wasn't done with Westminster politics. In 2015, after the Lib Dems had spent 5 years in coalition with the Conservatives, Lord Ashdown returned to chair the party's general election campaign.
And we are saying the Conservatives are the largest party.
Famously disputing the exit poll's prediction of a dire result.
If this exit poll is right, Andrew, I will publicly eat my hat on your proposal.
This
Andrew,
is a hat.
You are so predictable, aren't you? I just knew you'd do it.
I wanted to get a bigger one.
Paddy Ashdown's energy sometimes exhausted his colleagues, and he was mocked for his action man image, reinforced by clipped military tones and narrowed eyes staring towards the horizon. But he inspired respect for his constant ideas and enthusiasm, and his efforts to build the Liberal Democrats into a force in national politics.
Lord Paddy Ashdown, who's died at the age of 77. Well, many former prime ministers have paid tribute to Lord Ashdown. Tony Blair said in a statement, "I'm deeply saddened and shocked by the news about Paddy. I had enormous admiration for Paddy as a man and as a political visionary and leader. He was one of the most talented politicians never to hold high office, but as leader of the Liberal Democrats, he nonetheless had a major impact on British political life. He was motivated by values of compassion, decency, and a profound commitment to make the world a better place. He had courage, personal and political, unafraid to speak his mind, yet always open to the views of others. He was one of the least tribal politicians I have ever known. He came into politics to do good, and by and large did it, whether in leading his party, in his work in the Balkans, or his wide range of British and international roles. He'll be hugely missed by his many friends and admirers around the world. And of course, he was excellent company, always fun to be around. My deepest condolences and sympathy go to Jane and all the family." And another former Prime Minister, Sir John Major, paid his respects by saying, "In government, Paddy Ashdown was my opponent. In life, he was a much valued friend. His loss will be felt deeply by many, and not least by myself. Throughout his life, Paddy was a true patriot whose overriding wish was to serve his country, first in the Marines and then in both Houses of Parliament. I can attest to the fact that even when he knew he was gravely ill, Paddy's concern for the future of our country continued to dominate his thinking. I was not surprised. For Paddy, his country always came before personal or political advantage. My heart goes out to Jane, his children and his grandchildren, but they can be enormously proud of everything Paddy achieved. A man of duty, passion and devotion to the country, he loved right up to the very end." Very warm tributes there to Lord Paddy Ashdown. Well, we can now speak to the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, Tim Farron. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Farron, on this sad evening. First of all, your reflections on this news.
Well, I'm gutted. He was a hero to me. I guess he was the first person I voted for as leader when he became the first elected leader of the Liberal Democrats back in 1988. I was 18. And then it becomes an honour. They say you should never make your heroes. In the case of Paddy Ashdown, that was okay. He turned out to be every bit what you'd hoped he'd be. He was a man of enormous charisma. And so when you were around him, you almost felt affected by the energy, lifted by it. But in a time when there's so many people who use their charisma for, populist and rather reactionary reasons, he's a reminder that it's possible to use that power, because it is power, to move people from one place to another and to energise them for good. And he did that in many different parts of his life, winning the seat of Yeovil from third place, which is where he started in the first place through the 70s and when he won in 1983, and then rescuing the Liberal Democrats from the worst position we've ever been in. I mean, he always laughed about the opinion poll that one weekend put the Liberal Democrats under his leadership on 0%. Well, he took us from that to our best result for 3/4 of a century and very nearly ended up in government, revived us. Then he stepped down as leader, and within, I think it was 3 years, he was the UN High Representative in Bosnia and helped to build a country on the basis of justice, democracy, peace. After the genocide, the appalling bloodshed that had gone before, he achieved an enormous amount. I guess proof of the fact that he would have been an outstanding Prime Minister had we been able to get him that far.
A long and distinguished career, as you say. Thinking about him yourself as a former leader of the party, and Lord Ashdown, a former leader of the party, he had a unique style as leader, didn't he? Leading from the front.
Yeah, he was a campaigner leader. He was a person who had clarity and had vision. That's massively important. But there are times when, maybe you lack vision and you're looking for the next thing, the next stage you want to take the party to. And you can then look in the doldrums whilst you're in between visions, shall we say. And the thing about Paddy Ashdown, he could make up for that by just being phenomenally energetic, and he would keep people going and excited. And at times when we may felt deflated or flat, he was able to inspire people, which is a really unusual and rare talent. And I clearly didn't emulate him. However, I sought to try and model myself on him more than anybody else, because he was the epitome of somebody who understood the grassroots. He'd won his seat from nowhere, worked it up himself. He was responsible for his own victory. He therefore respected others who were doing the same thing. But he also had the ear for what, I'm trying to think of a nicer way, of normal people. He wasn't somebody who was stuck in the rarefied atmosphere of Westminster. He was an irregular, extraordinary guy who was also an ordinary person at heart himself. And he felt enormous compassion for people. He was very political, but he wasn't all that tribal. I think that was said by Tony Blair. He was very, very loyal to his team, but respectful of people who belonged to another team. And, we really, his sort. I think his passing is a personal blow to me, and especially to his family and people who knew him even better and who loved him. But it's also a reminder that we don't have a lot of that in this country at the moment, that kind of ability to be a big tent politician, to reach out beyond your tribe, make friends, but also make alliances. And maybe we should be looking to do more of that in his honour.
OK, very good to talk to you. Tim Farron, many thanks for your time. Thank you very much. Well, we can speak now to Lord David Steele, also former leader of the Liberal Democrats. Lord Steele, many thanks for joining us here on BBC News. First of all, your reflections on this sad day.
Well, it's come as a great shock, even though I knew he was very ill, because Paddy's whole image was one of an action man. He seemed sort of indestructible, and that, I think, is what makes his death so cruel. And I immediately want to convey my condolences also to Jane and the children. I think it's a terribly sad day for the Liberal Democrats, because he was the first leader who actually lifted the party from more than just a handful of seats, which Joe Grimm and Jeremy Thorpe and I had overseen. And he raised it up to being a really influential party in Parliament.
And he did this at a time of some political upheaval, because he was the first leader of the party that merged the Liberal Party with the Social Democrats.
Well, that's right. He took over after the merger, and it wasn't an easy time, because it was very difficult, and the polls were very low, but he picked it up and he ran with it. But I just remind you that he came into politics very much without a job. I mean, he took a huge risk standing for the Conservative seat of Yeovil. He had no money, no job, and he made it his own. And so the people there were very devoted to him, and he served them brilliantly during his time as MP.
And what sort of values would you say that he exemplified?
He absolutely identified with liberalism, and I think that was shown particularly with his concern about the Hong Kong Brits, the Chinese who had British citizenship in Hong Kong. He stood up for them, and he won the battle to secure their rights as British citizens. And that was a really obscure issue, but a very liberal one. And he will be remembered for that, as well as for all the more important things that he did in his life. And latterly, the last time I spoke to him, in fact, just 2 or 3 weeks back, was about the books he was writing. He was starting to carve out a new career as a really very interesting author on books really to do with the Second World War, and located in France, where, of course, he had a holiday house.
OK, Lord Steele, we'll have to leave it there. Many thanks indeed for your time. Lord David Steele there, remembering Lord Paddy Ashdown. Well, tributes have been pouring in for Lord Ashdown from across the political spectrum on Twitter. The former Liberal Democrat leader Tim Farron, who you heard from just a little while ago, wrote, "Paddy Ashdown was a hero to me. He saved and revived the Liberal Democrats at our lowest ebb, and then led us to our best result for 70 years. As a movement, we owe him our very existence. Much love to Jane and the family. Thank you, boss." The Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, has written, "Very sad to hear that Paddy Ashdown has passed away. One of the most friendly and compassionate people I've ever met in politics. Thoughts with his many friends and family. Rest in peace." And then this from the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. "My thoughts are with the family and friends of Paddy Ashdown. He represented Yeovil very well, and I got to know him in the 1980s when we often found ourselves voting in Parliament together against damaging government policies. He'll be greatly missed." And the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, said, "Paddy Ashdown was an advocate for those others forgot, full of courage, integrity and immensely gifted. He served the people of the Balkans with passion and inspiration, an agent of reconciliation. He will be greatly missed." Well, we can speak now to Colonel Bob Stewart, the Conservative MP who was a friend of Lord Ashdown and who served in Bosnia as Commander of the United Nations. Thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News. First of all, your reflections this evening.
Well, I've only just learnt about it, and I'm very sad. Paddy was a dear friend, and I'm getting a lot of feedback here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm so sorry. I got a lot of feedback from the phone. I first met Paddy in 92, 93, when I was the UN commander in Bosnia, and he was, well, I have to say, a great friend. When he turned up, he convinced me to take him to the front lines. I wasn't allowed to take anyone to the front lines. No generals were meant to go to the front lines, but Paddy somehow inveigled me. He said to me, I remember him saying, look, I was a soldier, I know what the front lines are, there'll be no problems. And I said, well, I'm not meant to take anyone of high rank to the front lines. I said, I'm going there today. And he said, well, I'll come with you. I said, but you're not meant to. In the end, he convinced me, and I put him in the back of my armoured vehicle, and we went to a place called Turbe. And I took him in, and I took him and introduced him to the frontline commanders there. And it went well. He was clearly confident and at ease on the front lines. But on the way back, a flipping great explosion occurred right in front of my vehicle. It was a mortar bomb that had been aimed by the Bosnian Serbs, I suspect. And I thought I'd been blinded, actually. I was in the front of the vehicle, but Paddy was standing in the back. And I said, well, that's it. That's done it. You know, that's all I want, to be reported that I've taken you to the front line. He said, well, no one will report it. It was on the 6 o'clock news, and I got a frightful bollocking.
So he was no respecter of rules, then?
Well, no, I don't think he was. I mean, he was always a friend. When I was in trouble at the end of Bosnia for various things which are relevant now, he contacted me and said, look, I've got this house in France. If you need to escape, no one will find you there. And I've always remembered that. He was a very good man, and I'm a little bit in shock that he's gone. I thought he'd be here forever because he was such a strong, decent type. But there we are. Life is strange. You never know when these things happen, but I have to say I'm very sad.
Bob Stewart, you sound a little bit in a state of shock. Did you know how ill he was?
No, I didn't, actually. It was typical of him that he didn't make a song and dance of it. He's been ill since October, I gather now. But he was not that sort of person. I don't think he really... I think he was a very strong man. He must have been a great leader in the Royal Marines. He was in the Special Boat Service, I know that, and then he was in sort of MI6, I think, or something like that. But the one thing I know also, he could speak Chinese pretty fluently. I think he was sort of Mandarin or Cantonese, so he was much cleverer than people thought. I remember people in Parliament would say, well, he's always looking into the distance, he's always quite remote. And I said, oh, yeah, he is. He was a member of the Special Boat Service, which is almost impossible to get into. He sort of ran MI6 in Geneva when he left the Royal Marines, when he joined the Foreign Office. Then he became an MP, and then he was leader of his party within 5 years. Yes, he must be pretty thick. He must be very, very silly. Must be stupid. And I just always thought Paddy, there was much more to Paddy than you see on the surface.
And the two of you ended up in different political camps, yourself a Conservative, he, of course, a Liberal Democrat, but that clearly didn't come between you when it came to friendship.
No, actually, he tried to recruit me for the Liberal Democrats.
But failed, clearly.
Well, it wasn't that, actually. It wasn't that so much. I was an army officer, and my real vocation was the army, and I didn't really think that I was a politician, so I didn't really give it a second thought. It was only a few years, actually many years later, that I came around to thinking maybe I should be a member of Parliament. But Paddy was a pretty big inspiration as to what a decent man in Parliament could do.
We're going to have to leave it there. Bob Stewart, many thanks for sharing your memories there of Lord Paddy Ashdown. Well, as you've been hearing, the former Liberal Democrat leader, Lord Paddy Ashdown, has died at the age of 77. We'll have more throughout the evening here on BBC News, but now it's time for a look at the weather with Helen Willett.